In 2020, there wasn't a team that was more snake bitten than the Denver Broncos. At least I can't think of one. Maybe the 49ers, but obviously I was watching with a close eye. Von Miller, probably the franchise's best defender ever, injured in the preseason, or whatever you call it, last year's preseason time frame. Bradley Chubb, he was injured for a good portion of the year. You had both starting corners were hurt. You started a wide receiver who literally hadn't thrown a pass since high school as your starting quarterback. This team was very snake bitten, but they still showed a lot of promise. The thing that the Broncos have to deal with is their Jekyll and Hyde quarterback in Drew Lock. He can be good. He has all the tools, but does he have it up here? Is he good enough to elevate himself? Is he going to be the next Josh Allen, or is he going to be the next Mitchell Trubisky? No one really knows yet. This is the third year. This is a pivotal year. The 2020 Denver Broncos were 5-11. They were 23rd in offense. They were 21st in defense. Those numbers don't add up for the amount of talent this team had on offense and the kind of defensive coaching this team is supposed to have. Granted, both sides were riddled with injuries all season long. That one game where the receiver started at quarterback, I think he had 12 yards passing. So obviously it's going to be a huge skew. So let me just continue running through this. The GM is George Patton. He was the Vikings GM, assistant GM, and then he came over to the Broncos. John Elway was really smart and was like, I don't want the responsibility of being a GM anymore, because then I'm going to get fired, and I don't want to get fired, so I'm just going to promote myself. That's a smart move. Way to fail up, John Elway. Head coach is Vic Fangio. Just talked about him. We're going to get into a lot of that later. Offensive coordinator, Pat Shurmur from the Giants. He was the head coach, and I don't know if that was the best move, bringing him on as offensive coordinator, because he hasn't offensive coordinated anything well in a long time. Defensive coordinator is Ed Donatal. He's basically been a Vic Fangio standby for a long time, but we all know Vic Fangio is the one calling the shots. Cap space, Broncos actually have a good amount in comparison to the other teams, and Von Miller is still under those books, so who knows if they're going to restructure him, who knows if they're going to cut him. Biggest need, you need a linebacker. You need linebackers across the board. Bradley Chubb and Von Miller, they play those outsides, but that middle linebackers are just weak, especially in the Vic Fangio system. Basically depends on those linebackers. When he was with the 49ers, he had Patrick Willis and you had Navarro Bowman. This is the type of linebackers that are needed. These are the type of exceptional athletes that are needed at that middle linebacker position, both that Mike and that Will, to play in a Vic Fangio defense. You need elite linebackers, and Denver Broncos need to figure out that linebacker situation, and they need to do it stat if Vic Fangio wants to continue being a coach. You need cornerbacks. Both your starting quarterbacks are injured. AJ Bouye was pretty much out the whole year. He's not coming back. The only one that pretty much played was Callahan, and he's basically your slot corner. But again, this is a huge need. You need safety. Defensive end, Von Miller and Chubb were both injured, and they didn't contribute as much as they should have. But that whole interior line also just needs to get fixed and rebuilt. Notable free agents. You got Justin Simmons, you got AJ Bouye, you got Shelby Harris, who's one of those fill-in defensive linemen. Sylvester Williams, another fill-in defensive lineman. You got Jeremiah Atachu, another fill-in defensive lineman. All these guys were fill-ins for the most part. So other than Justin Simmons, I feel like there's no real person that you need to replace on this team. The Broncos just need players. They have the cap space. They have the ability to get these players. So the GM's going to need to GM. The GM's going to need to build this defense so Vic Fangio can actually do his job, because I think he's an excellent defensive coach, just doesn't have the players to play his system, and he might be playing in a league that's past him. This league is all passing, and he was all about bend and don't break and hold the team, and there's no holding teams anymore. All these quarterbacks are just slinging the ball wherever they want, and especially when you're going against a cover two and you're expecting a linebacker to play that sort of deep third, it's not really sensible. Maybe it is time for a change, or maybe Vic Fangio needs to figure that out and get players that will be able to play. Maybe instead of two linebackers, you're running basically a big nickel the whole time. That's what's needed in this day's NFL, especially when you're in a division with Kansas City. you got the draft picks. You have your ninth pick. You have your second, your third round pick. You don't have anything crazy. I'm going to get to my mock draft later. But first, we're going to talk about free agents. And this is where we're going to get into what the Broncos need to do in order to be good for next year. Who I think, if I'm the GM for the Denver Broncos, Keanu Neal, Jason McCourty, Troy Hill, these are all defensive players that will be upgrades to whatever you've had before. I would try to re-sign Justin Simmons if I could, but Justin Simmons is the best safety that's going to be available in free agency, and are the Broncos going to be willing to spend that money to keep him? They might franchise him. I actually think he is definitely going to get franchise tagged, but they still need more pieces. But I would try to get Jason McCourty. He's a guy who can tackle. Troy Hill, he played really well in that Rams system, being that second cornerback. Maybe you can bring him in and draft another stud cornerback with that number 9 pick, which I'm going to get to later. The one thing I would do is, and this is probably not what Bronco fan wants to hear, is get rid of Von Miller. Trade him. I wouldn't cut him, because you can definitely probably trade him for at least something, an extra draft pick or whatever. Trade him somewhere where he wants to go. Trade him somewhere where he can be a contender. Trade him to the NFC somewhere. I would bring in Leonard Floyd, because Leonard Floyd, he knows Vic Fangio's system. He played really well in that Rams system where he was the outside rush linebacker. You bring him back, he's more seasoned. He knows what's going on. I bring him in, match him up with Bradley Chubb. None of these names are household names. They're not names that are popping off and it's like, wow, this is just going to be a game changer. But these are the little pieces that will allow your coaching to be executed properly. All right, so we're gonna get to draft predictions. So for my mock draft, I have the Broncos taking exactly what I think they should take, and that's Patrick Surtain. They gave me an F for this. Like, I don't know what PFF is doing. It's insane, whatever. This is the pick that I would make if I were a GM. Patrick Surtain II. He has a hard-nosed corner that he literally disappears one side of the coverage, and if you put him in the Vic Fangio system, I think he will be absolutely fantastic. Javon Holland, they say he's a cornerback, but he's coming out as a safety. You put him at that other safety position. If you get Keanu Neal or you're able to get Justin Simmons back, you have him at that other safety, and all of a sudden you got your deep second disappeared. Basically, the Broncos are getting all defense, and they're covering their bases with everything because they have tons of offensive weapons. The one pick that I think is very interesting that I made for them here, and I guess PFF liked this pick too, is they picked up Sam Ehlinger. And Sam Ehlinger is one of those guys that he went to Texas. He had a good but not impressive college career, but he's someone that could probably compete with Drew Lock. Sam Ehlinger, I think, could be one of those diamond in the rough quarterbacks. He could be one of those guys that never really flourished in Texas and then all of a sudden goes to the NFL and becomes the next Tom Brady. Sam Ehlinger could be that guy. I feel like he's got enough of the tools to be a good quarterback. Worst case scenario, he's Colt McCoy, which is a bridge starter until you bring someone else over. So, and he would definitely be an upgrade over any of the backup quarterbacks on the roster now. With that said, Bronco fan, this team is hard to know if they're going to be good or not. The Raiders were actually a decent playoff caliber team, but they're obviously missing some pieces. Their defense is terrible, and they still almost made the playoffs. You have a rising LA Chargers team, a perennial Super Bowl contender in Kansas City. So are you ever going to be able to overcome the juggernaut that is Kansas City and be competitive? This division is not the AFC East where everyone was trash and all of a sudden and New England's the only team that's good. All of these teams in the AFC West have the capability of being good. It's going to be rough to get wins in this division, but this team needs to win. Vic Fangio needs to win. John Elway needs to win. Drew Lock needs to show that he can step up. He needs to figure out if he's going to be Mitchell Trubisky or if he's going to be Josh Allen. If I'm Drew Lock, I'm on the phone with Jordan Palmer right now. It's like, teach me the way. Show me the force. How do I get good like Josh Allen did? Because Josh Allen was not good, and Drew Lock and Josh Allen are basically the same quarterback, except they're basically the same quarterback. They're both mobile, big arms, like total bros. Like, they're the same guys. Drew Lock has the capability of becoming this year's Josh Allen, and I might draft him in fantasy draft. So I'm betting on you, Drew. Don't let me down. There are more videos on the side. Check those out if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.